What I think you have to keep in mind as a leader is that the vast majority of people want to come and do a great job. And if you open up the opportunity for them to feel good about what they do, to feel good about the team that they work in and the individuals that they interact with, a lot of the rest will kind of take care of itself because they will challenge themselves to deliver and to perform at a high level. So we're really there as facilitators to allow them to maximize and take advantage of the capability that's inherent in them.
I'm excited to introduce to you my latest podcast, Run It Like You Own It. In this podcast, we're going to explain how you can use the science of human behavior to gamify the workplace.
The Run It Like You Own It podcast with Bowder Dye.
Darcy, I have to tell you, it's absolutely thrilling to have you join us on the podcast today. How long ago was it that we first worked together? I know it was in the neighborhood of a decade or so, but when was it that we first began to work? Do you remember?
Well, first thing I'd like to say is, boy, if you're thrilled to have me here, you get pretty cheap thrills. But anyways, thanks for having me, and I'm pleased to be here. I think it's been close to 10 years that we've known each other. We first got introduced when I was at my previous organization, and I had done some research around looking for some performance enhancement, performance coaching, and your name came up. And of course, Forefront was not Forefront at that time. It was known as a different name. And that was the start of what I would call a burgeoning relationship.
Yeah, it was. That was a really fun project. I remember that project well. And we had some characters on that project that were remarkably skilled and remarkably strong and some pretty tough nuts as well, right? That we struggled our way through it with.
Yeah, you've got that right. There's a slogan that you are saying that you gave to me while you were working on that project, and I won't mention who you were referring to specifically because they may or may not be flattered by this compliment, because I think it's both a compliment and constructive feedback. But you said, so and so is great. He's a 9 out of 10 at what he does, but unfortunately, he thinks he's a 15 out of 10. And our job is to try to make him a 15 out of 10.
That's right.
And that's always stuck with me. And I've used that joke slash non-joke many times over the past years since you said it, because I think it really captures and epitomizes what the objective of Forefront is and how you try to help organizations like mine.
You know, it's strange because you would think that that organizations that are really, really struggling would be our core demographic to go after, our core prospects. But what's really amazing is it's that organizations that are actually doing quite well, but they realize they need help to get to the next level, seem to make up a big portion of our client base as well, which is great, and it gives us an opportunity to work with the really fundamentals, but with the stars. But for us, it's neutral. It doesn't matter. We want to move one way.
Yeah, it's a great point. When we first got introduced to each other, I was around 25 years in the industry, and when you get to that point of your career, you actually feel like you know a lot. And sometimes, depending on who you are, you might think you know everything. And I remember when we first started interacting, and you were telling me that some of your best clients are the clients that are good and they want to be great. And everybody knows the very famous book, Good to Great.
Yeah.
And as you expanded upon that theme, as we were talking about how you may be able to help my organization at that time, I started to realize that, yeah, this isn't about taking a broken organization and getting it to an acceptable level. This is about, striving for that continuous improvement and getting better all the time. And the analogy that I like to think about, at that time, Tiger Woods was, the number one golfer in the world, and still, has a very large fan following, of course. So when you use this analogy, everybody knows who you're talking about. And when Tiger Woods was the number one golfer in the world and was, beating the field hands down very easily, he still was striving to become better. He had, a swing coach, and he had a chiropractor, and he had a nutritionist, and he had a chef, and he had a whole staff of people that were there to help him become better than he was, because he was striving. He had an insatiable appetite to strive to be better. And I think that's a great analogy. Ultimately his downfall was something else, but certainly at that time, that was a model that I looked at and said, yeah, this is about us wanting to be the best that we can be.
Yeah. When I always use the sports analogy as well. When kids start out in a sport, you have 12 or 15 kids per coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're the best in the world, you have more coaches. And you think from the outside, it should be the other way around.
Yeah,
Boy, if you're that good, why do you need all those coaches?
great.
Well, it's that much harder to get that much better. That
For sure.
incremental gain.
Yeah, there's very small separation, I guess, between people who are the best and people who are just incredibly good.
Right.
And because it doesn't matter whether it's sports or industry, the competition gets better. And you, especially in a, in a public environment where you're competing for capital and you're competing for investment and investors, you have to segregate yourself somehow. And, striving to be better is one of those tools that you have to do that.
So there's very, very little different in skill level between the very best and the second and third best.
Right.
But the difference in return on investment is massive. When you're the best, you get, Tiger Woods made so much more than everyone else. And if you go down to 10th or 15th place, even on the PGA Tour, um, the numbers are pale in comparison to what the very best makes.
Yeah, I'm sure we could talk about analogies forever here, but certainly, hockey analogy at this time of year is a great analogy because of the NHL playoffs and everything. But an NHL player average salary is an order of magnitude at least larger than the average salary of the next level down, right? There's not often a lot separating the skill and quality of the skills in those individuals.
But that brings up an interesting point, though, right? And we're in the playoffs right now. And the players have this incentive. They have a financial incentive to do well, but they have a social incentive to do well. They all want to raise the cup. They all want to be on the winning team. They want to be there. In organizations, we're trying to keep that energy level and that attention level up, but it's not that easy to do. And when you're very strong in your organization, it's really easy to become a little bit complacent. Hey, we're doing great. We're the most reliable plant. We've always been the star. We make the most money. Whatever the line is, why do we have to work that hard? And for them, the pay's the same. The pay for those on site aren't going to change.
Sure.
So the challenge that we have is how do you create that enthusiasm, that excitement
Mm-hmm.
in what's a repetitive environment in essence. So
I'm probably going to come across as being somebody who has read your book and I can quote lines out of it. And I guess to some extent that's probably true, but I'm a strong believer that everybody comes to their job every day and they want to do a fantastic job. The vast majority of people do. And I think there's plenty of scientific research and behavioral analysis and psychological papers that are out there that talk to that point. And that's what I think you have to keep in mind as a leader, is that the vast majority of people want to come and do a great job. And if you open up the opportunity for them to feel good about what they do, to feel good about the team that they work in and the individuals that they interact with, a lot of the rest will kind of take care of itself because they will challenge themselves to deliver and to perform at a high level. So we're really there as facilitators to allow them to maximize and take advantage of the capability that's inherent in them.
yeah, you're in an environment right now. I mean, you own 3 gas plants, sour gas plants in Alberta. So you're in a position right now that you're operating 3, or you own and operate 3 gas plants in the foothills. And gas plants are a little bit of a unique case because the operating crew gets rewarded in essence for steady state operations. The minute someone comes in or the minute they try to optimize the operation, then the plant can go and upset and it creates no end of work for them. It can take 12 or 18 hours for them to line out and to line out the plant again, the facility again, and it might cost literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so in essence, we have created a system where complacency and not trying anything is good, or that's they're rewarded for, and yet operating well and on the edge and maximizing the value of that facility is in the shareholders' interest, but it's not in their personal interest to do that. And it creates a really tough dynamic in those kinds of environments.
We challenge our guys to think, and I should say guys and gals, because we actually do have some gals in a very traditional male-dominated industry. We challenge our folks to take, sort of calculated risks, if you will. And I'm almost hesitant to use that term because people think about risk in the sense of, particularly in our industry, in the sense of safety. And of course, there's different risk tolerances depending on what topic we're talking about. And I would say that most people would agree that the ability and willingness to take a safety risk probably is far less than what the ability and willingness to take a risk in business and on the balance sheet might be. So we want people to take thoughtful risks, risks that they've thought about what the outcomes might look like, both good and bad. I'm a firm believer that if you never take enough risk, then you're not going to maximize and optimize your outputs either. And in my industry, particularly around the upstream portion of my industry, there's a very well-known saying, maybe not so much now in the days of exploiting unconventional reservoirs, because almost every well you drill now will be a productive well. There will be an outcome that produces either crude oil or natural gas liquids. But in the old days, in the old wildcatting days, you would often drill and spend a lot of money drilling a well and you'd get a zero outcome. And that was kind of the risk of the business. And some people would say, if you never drilled a dry hole, then you probably aren't taking enough risk. And I think that, that mantra and that thought process is a fair thought process to apply to anything that we do in business today. Now, of course, there has to be consistency and a good understanding from the top level of the organization all the way down to the frontline worker about what risk tolerance and risk appetite looks like. But at the end of the day, if you've communicated that well and everybody's on the same page, then we should all be capable and willing to take some degree of risk that's commensurate with the risk tolerance of our organization.
So I've sat in on literally dozens of meetings on your sites where we have a discussion of we're going to reduce the recirculation rate, or we want to reduce a temperature set point, and an engineer has calculated what the value of that is and what the risk is. But the fear of change is so palatable that you can't just go in there and say, hey, let's move our set point to here and then expect it to propagate through all the shifts in the weeks and months ahead. It takes a lot of conversations on all four crews and talking about the value and what our risk tolerance is and how we can, when do we stop? If it's, what are the indicators that are saying that we're coming to our limit and that we should stop, and how to value all that stuff. And it just takes a lot of time to get people's head in the game. But how we can kind of mitigate that time and that resistance to change is by making it really exciting when you do it.
That's right.
Oh, we saved 3 decks of gas, or we saved a deck of gas, or are we able to achieve this kind of outcome? And then we have to make sure that we celebrate those outcomes and make it really fun and interesting.
Well, and at the end of the day, we're playing a statistical game.
Right.
We don't think for 1 second that when we take a smart risk, that we're going to be 100% successful. Again, we shouldn't be 100% successful. So we are going to have some things that we do that don't economically succeed, that they're commercially challenged. But for every sort of failure outcome, if you want to call it that, we're believing that we can deliver 2 or 3 positive outcomes that more than make up for the failure outcome. And so that's what taking a smart risk is. And I'll tell you a quote that I think you actually know who said this in our organization and what they said, but it resonated with that person a lot at the time that I said it. And it didn't occur to me that it was profound to that individual, as it ultimately was. But I said, at one point in time, I was having a town hall style discussion with a large group of people. And I said something to the effect of, I want to shake the hand of the first operator who hydrates off a pipeline, because that means that you've taken some risk on reducing your chemical usage. And sometimes you don't know where that line of failure is, if you want to call it that, until you don't know where it is until you reach it. And that really resonated with that person. And that person has brought it up to me probably almost a half a dozen times in the last 6 to 12 months, saying, remember that day that you said that? I say that all the time to my folks. And, you probably don't take that same risk if the outcome means that somebody is going to get hurt or seriously injured in some fashion. But obviously, if it's a commercial outcome and there's a dollar amount that might be negatively impacted, but the upside with repeated outcomes being favorable, if you push that envelope, can more than make up for that detrimental loss in the 1 or 2% of the time where your outcome fails.
What you might not know, what you likely don't know, is the number of hours I've had around that quote that came out, because after subsequent to that coming out, I was in the control room. It's like, does Darcy have any idea what a hydrated line could do? He just doesn't understand. That's just dumb, right? And so that would be the feedback I'm getting. And then so that would start the discussion. Well, what is it that he is saying? What's really the message that's happening here? And how do we know what to do and how to do it? And I don't think that, I think we all know in this room that Darcy's not suggesting we do something unsafe. What is Darcy, in fact, suggesting that we do? And eventually that all comes around, and literally hours and hours that people understood that the status quo and a complacent reaction and a very safe, with a massive margin operating environment, isn't something that we can't afford anymore. At what point do we hydrate off? What are our risks when we hydrate? And then how do we mitigate that risk so that, we're not wasting money on chemical or
And that's
pressure.
that's really what you want out of these kinds of things, is if somebody has a concern with what was said or the approach that we're taking, bring it up. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the pros and the cons. Maybe they've got some things, some ideas around that comment that I haven't thought of. I'm not 100%. I don't bat 1,000. And so, I think it's actually a great point, because hydrate formation can lead to be a very significant safety concern. That's why we have processes and procedures written. That's why we follow those processes and procedures, because we're mitigating those risks down to an acceptable level. So by no means did I ever intend to diminish the potential impact of safety on a hydrate formation, but there's certain ways that we can handle hydrates that make them inherently relatively safe. And then, that's the balance that we have to strike as professionals and subject matter experts in our field, is what is that balance between the risk that we take, whether it be a commercial risk or some other risk, versus the kind of upside that exists by taking that risk.
So that comment was really the activator for a whole bunch of conversation around what is risk, what's acceptable risk, and how do we manage it in the organization. It became way less about hydrates and far more about who do we want to be when
Really
we grow
broaden
up.
the topic of discussion.
And so if you're in an operation that has become complacent over time, for whatever reason, that has become complacent over time, how do you've just answered the question, but how do you change that value and that culture, saying, look, this is not who we are. We're in the playoffs, where this isn't bush league, where we can just go out and pretend.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. Culture is that term that potentially means different things to different people, but the definition that was given to me a long time ago, and that's always stuck with me, is it's simply the acceptable norms around how we do things. And so the culture can change just by simply changing the acceptable norm about how the organization does something. And so, we had quite a challenge when I came to the organization, and frankly, we still have that challenge. It's not as big of a challenge as it once was, because we're making inroads. But when I first came to the organization, one of the largest challenges was trying to assimilate 3 different cultures from 3 different organizations. There was the existing organization that carried the company name of Paraday Energy. There was a former company name where that corporation was purchased by Paraday Energy. And then there was a group of people who came from yet a third organization, which was a very large, well-known organization who owned a lot of the assets that we now own today. And bringing those 3 different groups of people who were all from very different backgrounds and trying to assimilate that into one culture was a huge challenge. And frankly, it remains one of our challenges.
It's funny that you say that, because I remember that being an issue when I first showed up, and it was talked about a lot. And and they would refer to people from the 3 different organizations in essence.
Sure.
But I haven't heard that in an awfully long time, actually. I think we're getting past that, and now with the rebranding and the new name, you might have nailed that one.
Well, I'm
It'd be
happy
a
to
long
hear.
way to having it completed, actually.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. It's always interesting, and it's important to me to hear outsiders like yourself who, you're not necessarily involved in the game, but you're standing on the sidelines watching the game. And when you can come and tell me that, here's something that I've observed, it's kind of a good validation of what you might be thinking already. And so that's a great validation that perhaps it's not as big of an issue as it once was, which is our goal, of course. And that's been my feeling. So I've suspected that, but it's really good to get that data point, and I can put a little check mark on the box.
I think you can go a long way towards that. A colleague of ours asked me. He said, how's the new name received?" And it was funny because that was in the evening after I'd spent a bunch of time in the control room. We were literally talking about the name, and one of the comments that I got right off the bat was, "Is that it's too bad that we didn't change the name in January, 6 months from now." Because that's when we'll have the sulfur energy,
I see.
the sulfur income, and
Yes.
then that's when that's would have been the right timing.
Sure.
And we all kind of laughed about that. We all kind of laughed and joked about that, and they
Sure.
thought, well, that's kind of aspirational then.
Yeah.
I mean, not everything happens. It wasn't quite a literal. I'm sure he didn't mean it that literally, but
Sure.
it's like, boy, wouldn't that be something if we did that in January?
It's certainly a valid point.
Yeah.
This is, not about talking about this company, of course, but one of the reasons that we selected the timing that we did is because we've made some significant strides with respect to our corporate strategy, and we've
Right.
executed some of the things that all of the things that we said that we set out to do in the first 18 to 24 months. And because we've been successful in doing that, we felt that this was the right time to rebrand, and we're going to carry on that momentum and attack the remaining strategic initiatives and goals that we have. And we want to do that under the Cavi Energy name.
So it's not normally in my scope, but it happens in every project. Is when you go out into the field, people have inadvertently they have blinkers on, right, and they're seeing their world this way.
Sure.
And I mean, you're in a position where you have to look at the universe of opportunity and the universe of challenges that you have. And
Sure.
I spend an inordinate amount of my time talking about trying to open up those blinkers.
Yeah.
Well, why would they do that? I mean, that's a favorite question of mine. When people challenge me, that's the dumbest thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of defending whatever that action was, my question is, well, why would they do that? They got to. They're not dumb.
Right.
It's got to be a good reason.
Sure.
And then you engage everyone in that conversation. Well, hang on, what are the conditions that would cause us to start doing that?
Sure.
Then very quickly people start saying, well, it's kind of a smart way of doing it, or that's good. And you just force them into the other into someone else's shoes and to force open those blinkers.
Yep.
And then they get excited about it. Then they feel like they're part of something bigger.
Yeah, it's human nature, of course, to have tunnel vision. You don't know what you don't know,
Right.
and so we tend to automatically sort of retract to what we do know, and what's important to us and our families, and what's important to us morally and ethically and things like that. So, to me, part of being a leader in a company like this is getting our message out there and trying to explain to people why it is important to take those blinders off and expand your horizons a little bit, and see it for what's good for the company. Because if it's good for the company, it's good for you too. And there's many different ways. People equate that to, oh, does that mean that I'll make more compensation, more dollar bills in my pocket? That might be part of it, but it's not the only thing either. And again, I think, there's lots of information out there that suggests that people don't just work for money. In fact, lots of information that I've seen says that that's way down the list in terms of priorities for people who want a good, fulfilling, rewarding job and career.
When I do my seminars on human behavior in the workplace and applying it, I always call pay as it's a tier one. There's no question it's a tier one consequence. It's a very powerful consequence, and you'd have very few people working for you if pay wasn't a factor. They wouldn't come to work. So, but as a tier one, it's probably in the bottom of the list. There's no question about it. We get far more value from plot pride and being challenged and getting a sense of accomplishment, feeling appreciated for our efforts. All those kinds of activities are far more important, or a far better indicator on performance.
Absolutely.
Than pay.
Yeah.
And you just ask any sports star, you double their salary because they get a big contract or they work twice as hard.
Right.
They just don't, for sure. It doesn't happen. There's no correlation there. And
Well, and I think I've seen numerous examples, just watch people's faces, that the recognition that they get for a job well done, whether it be in a public environment or a more private environment, everybody's different and prefer different types of feedback. But you can just see people's faces brighten when they get a recognition that is aligned with what they feel good about, and that has nothing to do with dollars and cents.
Tomorrow I know tomorrow you're going to one of the sites, and there's going to be 3 or 4 people that are going to stand up and talk about what their contribution has been. And it's funny because they they come to me in sense and fear. Why? The CEO is coming down, and I'm doing a presentation in front of the CEO, and what happens if I screw up? And is this really necessary? Is it important? They go through all this trepidation.
Sure.
And yet, when they're done, they're high as a kite. They're 2 inches taller than they went in, and their sense of accomplishment goes through the roof. It has nothing to do with pay, but loyalty and commitment just go through the roof.
Mhm.
And I hope the quid pro quo for you is that you see the kind of activities that are happening in your sites, the kind of work that they're doing, and that
Yeah, we think it definitely translates when we have people who are willing and able to stand up and talk about the great things that they're doing in the organization. It also shows a level of engagement, and frankly, as much as those people, I believe, can be extremely nervous and have a lot of trepidation about doing it. Like you said, when they're done, they have this tremendous sense of accomplishment. It feels like they've contributed something to the team. And I also think that there's a bunch of their peers sitting in the audience who probably are a little bit jealous that they got some airtime like that. And they sounded good and they looked good and they came across as credible and they know what they're talking about. And so, my wish is that by people doing that, they're actually engaging their fellow workers and their peers to get out of their shell a little bit and talk about the great things that they do, because everybody does great things.
Right.
Some people take the opportunity to talk about it and want to talk about it, and other people are much more reserved and they have to be drawn out of their shell in order to share it.
I often say that we do what we're rewarded for.
Mhm.
And so that kind of flips on the other side. So if you're being rewarded for doing, for being innovative and finding opportunities and moving the organization forward, there are some people that aren't being rewarded for that. They're being rewarded for being a disruptor
Sure.
in some sense. And that, if they create difficulty on you and they're getting attention and they're being rewarded for the wrong behaviors,
Right.
it's kind of like, whoa, what do you do then? How do you handle that?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I like to kind of flip that script back.
Sure.
Okay, how do we handle this scenario? Right?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think when you have people who are disruptive or disruptors, it generally means that they actually care a lot. That's what the subject matter is that they're talking about or being disruptive about. And part of the job that you have as a leader is to channel their energy into the right direction. Let's take the energy that can be destructive in terms of the things that you do or the things that you say. Let's channel it in a way that it can be constructive, so that it can be a net benefit to the objective that we're all striving for. And sometimes people like that, I equate it a little bit to maybe having a hyperactive child. If you can get that person, and I'm not trying to belittle the behaviors or the actions or the words of those people who are behaving that way, but I think we've all known or maybe even have children that are hyperactive or have been officially diagnosed with ADHD or something like that. If you can channel their energies into the right path, they can accomplish tremendous things. And I often view disruptive employees or employees who are disruptors as just needing some help to channel their energy in the right direction.
I couldn't agree more. And that's everyone in organizations. Often people get really, really frustrated with the disruptors and say, "Oh, can't we just fire them and
Right.
we'll be done with the headache?" But
Yeah.
you know, every organization has the biggest headache. It's like a survivor. You always want to. There's always someone to be fired or kicked off the island, no matter what. In the organization, there's always someone to kick off the island, and so really, what you want to do is like let's channel those skill sets and chase that and move that the right way. And in my opinion, some of the um, some of the disruptors that you have in your organization are some of your strongest assets.
Absolutely.
Some really smart, clever,
Yeah.
well-trained folks.
Yeah.
And so the question isn't, do we want to get rid of them? No, the question is how do you utilize them to the best of our abilities?
So I also think as a leader, the least innovative approach that you can take to somebody who's disruptive to the organization is to simply let them go. I don't think that there's a limitless supply of time and energy that a leader has to try to course correct somebody, but there certainly is a certain basic level of effort and time that should be dedicated to that person to see what kind of potential they have.
Right.
And as a leader, it's anybody can make a decision to fire somebody or to get rid of somebody. That's super easy to do. Can make that happen in 30 minutes. But it takes a much more deep commitment and I think a better understanding of where we're trying to go and how we're going to get there to put a bit of effort into getting that person to be a productive employee or a more productive employee at least.
And then you have the other disruptors, the people that are just so dedicated and so committed that they just run over everyone
Right.
in their achievement of the results.
Right.
And again, you want those stars as well because they get so much done. There's some people in organizations that just get 2 or 3 times the work done that the average they're just that committed and that focused and that clever to do it.
Yeah.
But
And that's why you need a team of people because there's so many different skills that are brought to the table and different characteristics. And you hopefully mesh them all together so that the sum of the parts equals greater than the whole.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That makes it fun. It makes it fun and interesting and
Fun and challenging.
fun and challenging.
Sure.
You manage through all the personalities of it.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
let's take a look here. So one of the you know, well, we might be getting a little bit out of order here, but one of the challenges that I always challenge the COO with is disseminating the corporate culture and the values and who we are. And he is a man that stays true to his values. And when you ask him to bend the rules to get a result, the answer with him is always no. It's not going to happen. But I've bugged him a number of times to come out to the sites, spend time on the sites, and he always responds, "I'm spending way more time on the sites than I ever have before about her." And that's like, but it's not enough. I said, you could double it and I'd still bug you that it's not enough. It's always this challenge back and forth. And so he understands the value of presence on site and talking, and it's just the hours it takes to get people going.
Yeah.
But again, I still think the control rooms are difficult. You have clever people that are well trained, that have pursued a lot of schooling. They're operating a very complex environment, and yet we do everything to minimize their job. We have teams to reduce alarms, and we have teams to automate processes, and we automate their whole process. And so we ask really clever people to sit idle for a lot of the day. And then when we wonder why they're frustrated,
Right.
and they get bitter.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle that I actively work on, but it's difficult to overcome. In my whole career, it's been very difficult to overcome that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the frontline worker, and particularly around our company, given that we do have these 3 fairly significant gas processing facilities. The jobs are relatively unique, and those control panel operators, they do have a tremendous amount of knowledge and skill, and there's probably some knowledge that they have that you can't read in a textbook. It just comes about from hours of watching the action and reaction that occurs in a processing facility like that. And so, somebody like me will never understand the nuances of operating a facility like that. And I certainly want to acknowledge that that's the case. And there's probably times where I think about it much more simplistically than it actually is. But I'd also like those frontline workers to understand that at the end of the day, my job and the job of everybody who reports to me, their job is to make them successful too. So it's all about dialogue. It's about collaboration. If we say something or do something or ask you for something that sounds outlandish or crazy, talk to us. Tell us it sounds crazy. Here's why we think it sounds crazy. We'll dialogue it out. And at the end of the day, we'll have to stack hands and agree that we're going to pursue a certain path. And that's the outcome that we're looking for. We don't all have to, have the same thoughts and opinions. In fact, it would be a pretty boring place to work if we all had the same thoughts and opinions. We need to talk about what those options and alternatives are. And like I said, stack hands at the end of the day and agree that we're going to go down that path and we're going to be committed to it.
I had an operator tell me literally last week, and we were in an optimization meeting and we are debating some issue that I didn't understand, technical issue that I didn't understand. And I'm kind of pushing him to do a little research and going down the line. And finally he turns to me and goes, Valor, if I had a magic button, I'd press it. Like don't get me wrong. If I knew what
The
to
stainless
do,
easy button.
Yeah.
We use that analogy a lot.
that's right. Yeah. If I knew what to do, like if I knew how to make this better, I would do it better.
Sure.
And I get where he's coming from, because I'm oversimplifying. It's a process I don't understand. So of course it's simple in my mind.
Right.
And he's struggling, with, four or five panels in front of him with literally thousands of measures and metrics and measures and all these commingled processes that he's got to manage back and forth. And yeah, it is tough.
That's the challenge of innovation. I think a lot of people, myself included, we talk about being innovative in our approach to our work, to our jobs, and people confuse innovation for invention. People automatically jump to the default of, well, if you're telling me to be innovative, you're actually asking me to create something that has never existed before. I'm the first one to think of this. We're the first company that's ever tried this, but that's actually not what we're asking. We're saying, you've got a ton of knowledge, you've got a ton of information at your fingertips. Think about creative ways that you can utilize that information to affect a different outcome than what you get today. Think about what the ramification of changing set points would be, both the positive and the negative aspects. Again, assess the risks associated with making those changes. And if the potential for the reward outweighs the risk, then we should think about doing it. And if you're unsure, talk to your colleagues, talk to your supervisor. Collaboration and dialogue and discussion is a way to leverage the knowledge that you have as a single individual into many different individuals. I often say, I come to work for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day, whatever it might be on any given day. I'm just one person, and I can't change the outcome of this company any more than any other individual can. But if I get 10 people who think like me, creatively and innovatively, and have an appetite for continuous improvement like I do, well, I've just increased the power of me as an individual times 10. And if everybody does that, it's, if you tell two friends and they tell two friends and so on and so forth, pretty soon you have influenced a large number of people who can make large outcome differences.
Lee Iacocca, I hope I know I can't. Lee Iacocca years ago had said that, and he was always dying for the next promotion, because he figured as he got the next promotion, he'd finally have the power to do all the changes that he thought were necessary.
Sure.
And as he got promoted through his career, he realized that he was losing direct power, and he had to use indirect power to get the results he wanted. He said it kept getting tougher and tougher.
Sure.
And when you're on the line and you have a really limited scope of what you're doing, you have full control of that whole item. And
Sure.
when you're sitting at the boardroom table and there's literally hundreds or thousands of people below you, it's really tough to implement a change.
I can imagine.
I remember one of the meetings, again, one of these optimization meetings. This was just before Christmas, and I was with a crew that's known to be fairly tough. It's a couple tough guys, great guys, by the way, but they're just tough until you warm up with them, until they warm up with you. And we were going to implement a change that had been identified as having some potential, and we talked it through again. And we were just going to go into the Christmas break, and so it's something that we wanted to run for a week or 14 days to see what the whole impact of this change was going to be. It's a change of a set point. But the crew that was following them was a very conservative, staid crew, and we're going into night shift, and then we were going into holidays. And so I asked them, I said, well, how are we going to roll this out? Because it's just you, but we have 4 crews to deal with. And he goes, oh no, they're going to do it for 2 weeks. Like,
Right.
we're just going to tell them we're going to do it.
Right.
So this is the operator telling me that he's going to, make this this directive, and this is the way it's going to be. And
Sure.
so I remember asking him, "You think that's going to work?"
Right.
And it was just kind of dawned on him that
Right.
he was taking on a challenge that we had in the organization,
Sure.
a challenge that he often fought.
Sure.
And he goes, "No, we gotta make this go. It's important for us to make it go." And so
Sure.
we spent less time talking about the actual change and why we were doing the change and the potential impact from it, and more time talking about how we were going to roll it out over Christmas to 4 crews
Sure.
operating in a way that they're not used to operating.
Sure.
And I was with an operator, and,
Right.
and he's a big guy, he's a tough guy, and he'd been around, a senior guy, I shouldn't say big guy, he was a senior guy and tough guy, he'd been around for a long time, and so he was our conduit to roll out the change,
Right.
and we did in fact manage to keep the change.
Right.
In fact, the change is still there. It was a wild success. The test was a wild success, and it became a new practice.
Yeah.
But it was work. It was work to do. It wasn't
Change
just
management.
technical work. It was
Change management is hard, and change management is a term that scares people sometimes because it sounds like it means a lot of work and a lot of process, and at times it can be. But sometimes change management is simply about thinking about, if I enact this change, what are the potential ramifications? Again, the good, the bad, the risks. How do we mitigate risks? It's just about thinking about those outcomes, talking to the people that they're going to affect, and stacking hands and saying this is the path that we're taking. So change management is something that I think every organization struggles with to some extent, but it's a very important part of what we do.
the same crew I was referring to before is they had a little bit of a habit that when you walk into the control room, they wouldn't acknowledge you. They'd keep their back towards you, and then they wouldn't say hello. It's kind of a rude, passive aggressive
intimidating.
practice. It's a little bit intimidating. But to their defense, there's a lot of people that are going in and talking to them. It's their home, but it's something I wouldn't let my kids get away with.
Right.
It's like there's
You'd
just
call
symbol.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I did with them. I've done a number of times I do with them. We just kind of call it out, and over time it goes away. You earn some credibility. But the same difficult old school crew, you were one of your facilities had trouble with nitrogen. I don't know if you know the story, but we were losing nitrogen somewhere, and we had to solve the problem.
Okay.
And I went into the control room, and all the guys were all around the table, and they were trying to figure it out and throwing ideas out, and they couldn't figure it out. And then they turned and go back to their panels, and then someone would have an idea, they'd come out, and someone went up and got the blueprints and followed the line diagram to figure out where it was. And then they sent someone out to check the valve and to check a process, and then someone else they sent out to follow the line.
Sure.
That team was, if you had just a video of that team, you'd say, that is the team that I want.
Right.
Committed, dedicated, chasing the problems, assigning work back and forth to each other to solve an immediate problem that you had.
And clearly
Superstars.
demonstrating interactive behaviors and
Everything that you'd want.
Yeah.
There is an absolute home run.
Yeah.
And yet you can walk into that control room 3 days earlier, and
right.
they wouldn't have said hello.
Sure.
And it's those dynamics are funny. But in my opinion, running gas plants like that, those are some of the toughest environments in those. Sure. They're just difficult, tough environments full of smart people that, in my belief, are often underutilized because they have way more cycles in their mind that they have the opportunity to practice in the workplace.
Well, I can just tell you from my own experience, when I get the opportunity to talk to people who are, on the front lines, working the control panels, out in the plant site, the fields, it blows me away the level of knowledge that those folks have. It's not necessarily academic knowledge. It's sometimes hands-on knowledge. It's often hands-on knowledge, but they absolutely blow me away with what they know. And we have smart people in every facet of our business. And I think the biggest limitation that I have seen in a lot of our frontline staff is they don't feel confident in talking to people from the Calgary office, especially if they're talking to, people who have formal training as an engineer or something like that. They think that they can't compete with the level of expertise or information or knowledge that those trained professionals have. And I try to tell them all the time that if anything, it's the other way around. The engineers need to learn from you guys because you guys have a lot more practical knowledge that the engineer can benefit from. So
The DNA in the boardroom is the same DNA as on the factory floor.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
don't fool yourself. And so the same will, initiative, and you find that throughout the organization. And if Darcy, if ever you need a pick me up, if ever you're beaten up at work, get on the conference call at 8 o'clock in the morning from a field superintendent after it's been minus 40 over the weekend. Just log on and don't say anything.
Yeah.
It'd be great if you could log on with someone else's
Sure. Yeah.
ID so they don't put on a show, because when you log on and they know you're listening. But if you could listen in on, to the call, is that the problems that they solved, the work that they had done, the hurdles that they had to overcome, all while working in minus 40 and windy and those struggles, is you can't get off that call and have pure admiration for the work ethic of your staff. And
Yeah. I
that,
couldn't agree more.
there's no question about that. And people, I hear that all the time. What do they do? I don't understand it. It's like, how come they're not performing anything? Wait a minute. Listen in on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
Maybe not on a Thursday afternoon when everything's working great. Yeah. There might be a lot of slack in the system. But when it's minus 40 out, these are the hardest working people that you'll ever see.
We try hard. Not saying we succeed all the time, but we try to recognize those efforts. I can tell you that John, our chief operating officer, and myself, when we do our Christmas messages or our New Year's messages in our town halls, we try to acknowledge the work, the effort, the dedication that we get from those people working in sometimes abhorrent conditions, frankly, cold, windy,
Lately.
things that I don't want to do. I can tell you that, but somebody's got to do it, and they take their job very seriously. They get it done. They do it well. And I'm sure that, sometimes when they see the letters come out at Christmas time or at New Year, and we thank people for their effort and dedication, it probably comes across as that's normal platitudes coming from the people in the big tower in Calgary. But I can tell you that we don't put those thoughts down on paper without truly believing them. Certainly in this organization, I think most organizations that's true, and they're not just platitudes. But John and myself and the entire leadership team at the company are extremely appreciative of those efforts because we know how hard it is. We probably don't know all of the aspects of how hard it is, but we certainly know at a high level how difficult that job can be.
Yeah, there can be some real challenges.
Yeah,
You have some guys that are real good at modeling that behavior,
sure.
and
Great.
that's
Fantastic.
it's fun. It's fun to see. And it's fun to watch. So
Yeah, we're excited because we do have those people on staff. So
yeah, to me, that's the driver of that. That's the heartbeat of a lot of improvement initiatives.
yeah.
If you put people in the room, and this is a bias I've had from day one with improvement initiatives. If you put people in a room and you do a big kumbaya exercise, and everyone's got to get along, and kind of a huggy kissy type thing, you don't get a result. Change people's title, you don't get a result. The trick is that if you're going to have the same operator go to the same well and expect a different result, what is he going to do different? And the only way you can drive that change is through your metrics and talking about the metrics and get them talking about the dollar results or the production results or the safety results, the actual objective results on what they do.
Yeah.
And you have to be out of the platitudes and just get to the real stuff.
Yeah, you have to measure what's important. And I think at our company, we make a very strong point of doing that. There's many things that we measure. Our staff will know that every town hall that we do, we talk about our corporate KPIs.
That's right.
Every single one of those performance criteria have a measurement number associated with them.
Right.
And that's just what we do because it's important to us. I've often said, if you don't measure what you do, it's just practice. And I think practice is good, but playing in the game is a hell of a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And anybody who wants a good rant about practice just popped into my head. If people don't know who Allen Iverson is, Allen Iverson was a very good NBA basketball player, professional basketball player. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go onto YouTube and Google Allen Iverson practice rant, and you'll get about 5 or 8 minutes of some of the most entertaining going off on practice that you've ever heard. But it's all about somebody trying to hold a professional basketball player accountable for their performance and not taking practice serious. And the reason he didn't take it serious was because what are we measuring here? We're not scoring points.
Yeah.
We're not grading each other on this. This is just a practice. So, I like to think that everything that we do is a game situation. We have to keep score. We have to measure.
It's just funny you say that. My kids were both competitive swimmers.
Right.
My two boys were both competitive swimmers, and their coach would not let them practice slack. And so if they came into the wall and they didn't come into the wall hard, they'd have to go out and do a minute of planks.
Right.
And like, it didn't matter if it was a practice or not. You did it like it was race day.
Yeah.
And you finish it like race day. And his line was, you don't get to practice poorly.
Right.
Like, if we're going to practice, we're going to practice right.
Sure.
And he always made or he didn't always make the argument. He once told me a story. So when Michael Phelps, he told a story when Michael Phelps came into the wall.
Sure.
He had a 0-0 time difference between the guy next to him.
Right.
But he ended up winning the gold.
Right.
Because he hit the wall harder.
I see. Yes.
And that was proof after the fact, saying, look, you don't come in and just you hit the wall. You do it like it's a race day. You come in hard.
It's the difference between good and the vast.
Yeah. It's just between silver and gold for
That's right.
for Michael Phelps on that race.
That's
on that
right.
time. It's that was good. That was a great little discussion. And boy, I could go on forever talking about your three facilities. They're fun and interesting, and you've got a lot going on there.
Yeah.
You just came off a great shutdown.
Yeah.
You're well set up for a good couple of years.
Yeah.
Good couple.
We feel we've made a lot of headway and
Yeah.
progress, but we still got a long ways to go. And
Yeah.
we're not going to give up until we don't work there anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, John, I don't know if John passes it on, but I give John a call every now and again and whine about the progress and where we are and what we got to do. And he holds me accountable to it.
Sure.
And vice versa. And it's fun. We just keep walking down the path.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah, we feel like we've had a great partnership over the period of time that you worked for our company here. And I think the toughest part, as I said to Jeff, and Jeff was talking about at the start of this, is it's really difficult to measure the outcome in your performance as a company in discrete buckets. You can look at the total outcome and the total output and say, okay, here's our numbers, and here's how much better they were, and here's the variance analysis. It's very difficult to distinguish it into the unique buckets and say, well, we engaged the services of Forefront to come in and help us. Well, that was worth 12.7% of that. We can't do that. But it's an aggregation of a whole bunch of initiatives that ultimately deliver the outcome. And you have to have a belief that each of these initiatives is driving their own value. And I know that, for yourselves, I think you guys target an absolute minimum 3-to-1, if not a 5-to-1 sort of return on investment, right? And if we didn't believe that we were getting that out of you and every other aspect of what we put into our business, we would stop doing it. So,
well, I liken it to old school making a candle. Is every time you take the wick, you dump it into the wax, the melted wax. A lot of it washes off.
Sure.
But a little layer stays on.
Yeah, that's
a little layer stays on. So you just keep dipping.
That's a great analogy.
And we're one or two or three of those layers.
Yeah.
And there are layers before us, and there'll be layers after us. But you have to keep dipping the candle, and that's how you grow and develop.
That's a fantastic way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's end there. And
Sounds good.
appreciate it, Darcy. It was great fun. I really enjoyed that. Thanks.
Likewise, I appreciate that.
Thank you for watching the Run It Like You Own It podcast with Wouter Dai. Visit forefrontperformance.com or find us on social media at forefront.performance.